Okay, so you've probably seen this headline making waves. U.S. President Donald Trump granting refugee status to almost 60 Afrikaners from South Africa.
Right. And the reason given, citing a genocide.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that word genocide, it's incredibly loaded. Applying it here to white South Africans, it definitely makes you stop and think, what's actually going on? What are the different sides saying?
It really does. The term itself carries such immense historical weight tied to specific horrific events. So understanding why it's being used now in this context, and how that stacks up against, well, the facts on the ground and the information we have, that's vital.
And that's exactly the deep dive we're doing today. We've pulled together quite a mix of sources to try and get a full picture. Got a BBC News article, some pretty lively discussions from Reddit, Serve Behind the Bastards and Foreign Politics.
Okay.
An opinion piece from MSNBC, another politics thread, one from Rascal Liberal, a short bit from The Times, and also insights from Ras Conservatives. So quite a range.
That's good. Essential, really, when you're dealing with something this sensitive and debated. We need the reporting, the opinions, the arguments from different angles.
Absolutely. So our mission today is pretty clear. Let's unpack this claim, this genocide claim against white South Africans. We want to get the context, the history, the current situation.
And explore all those different viewpoints our sources offer.
Right. Okay. First things first. Let's set the stage. Who exactly are the Afrikaners?
Okay, so the Afrikaners are an ethnic group in South Africa. Their roots go back mainly to Western European settlers, starting way back in the 17th century.
Dutch, mostly, right?
Primarily Dutch, yeah. But also German and French Huguenots. Over time, they developed their own distinct culture, very tied to Africa, and their language, Afrikaans, which is similar to Dutch but unique.
And they're also known as Boers, which means farmers. That points to their history in agriculture.
Exactly. That farming connection is strong historically. But their history takes a really dark and, frankly, dominant turn in the 20th century with apartheid.
Yeah, that's crucial context.
Absolutely. In 1948, it was an Afrikaner-led government that formally established apartheid. And this wasn't just, some vague discrimination. It was a brutal, systematic regime.
Extreme segregation.
Extreme racial segregation, yes. It touched every part of life through a whole raft of laws, banning interracial marriage, reserving skilled jobs only for white people.
Forcing black people into townships, the so-called homelands.
Right, forcibly removed and confined, and the education system was deliberately unequal.
That infamous quote from Hendrik Verwoerd, the architect of apartheid education,
well, yes,
saying black people should just be hewers of wood and drawers of water. Basically, educated only for manual labor.
It's chilling. It perfectly captures the dehumanizing core of the whole system.
And this white minority rule, it lasted until 1994.
Until 94, yeah, with the first truly democratic elections that brought Nelson Mandela and the ANC to power.
So where do Afrikaners stand now, population-wise?
Today, they're about 4% of South Africa's population. Still a significant number, though, over 2.5 million people.
Okay, so with that history in mind, let's look at Trump's claim and what he actually did. He granted refugee status, citing this genocide. And the BBC reported that around 60 Afrikaners then came to the U.S. after getting asylum. But here's a detail the BBC pointed out that kind of makes you scratch your head.
What's that?
Apparently, the South African government actually allowed the U.S. Embassy to process these applications inside South Africa.
Oh.
And they even let the group leave on a chartered flight. Well, it doesn't sound like the typical way things happen when people are fleeing an active genocide, does it?
No, it really doesn't. It suggests a level of, cooperation, or at least permission. That seems quite odd if the government itself believed a genocide was happening, or worse, was involved in it.
Right. It definitely raises questions about how urgent or severe the threat was perceived to be, at least by the South African government.
A very good point. It doesn't quite fit the narrative you'd expect.
Exactly. Now let's bring in another big name, Elon Musk. South African born, and he's also raised concerns specifically about what he called racist ownership laws.
Yes, Musk has weighed in. He argued that his company, Starlink, couldn't easily operate in South Africa because of regulations.
The ones requiring partial ownership by certain groups.
That's right. He mentioned a 30% ownership requirement for historically disadvantaged groups, which mainly means the black population excluded during apartheid. He framed this as, well, Reverse racism, essentially.
But the BBC report had something to say about that, didn't it?
It did. They cited ICASA, the communications regulator in South Africa, and ICASA's statement was pretty direct. Starlink had never actually submitted an application for a license.
Oh, well, that changes things.
It's a significant point. If they never applied, then the ownership rules, whatever they are, couldn't be the reason they weren't operating yet. It shows you need to check these claims.
Definitely. And Musk didn't stop there. He also accused the EFF party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, of actively promoting genocide with that song they sing.
Yes, the Shoot the Boer song. That brings us to a really contentious issue.
Tell us about that song.
Shoot the Boer, shoot the farmer. It's become a trademark for the EFF leader, Julius Malema, often sung at their rallies. It actually originates from the anti-apartheid struggle.
As a protest song.
As a protest song, yes, against the white regime and the injustices back then, but understandably, Afrikaner groups today see it very differently. They argue it's hate speech, that it incites violence against farmers, against Afrikaners.
And they've tried to get it banned legally.
They have. It went through the courts, all the way up to the Supreme Court of Appeal.
And the outcome?
The court ruled. Well, they acknowledged it's provocative, no question. But they said, in its political context, it's understood as the EFF pushing their agenda on land and economic injustice.
So, not literal.
The court reasoned that a reasonably well-informed person wouldn't take it as a literal command to go out and shoot people. South Africa's highest court, the Constitutional Court, then refused to even hear an appeal, so that ruling stands.
So, the legal system basically said it's protected political speech, even if it's deeply offensive to many.
Pretty much. Though it's worth noting, even former President Thabo Mbeki urged Malema to stop singing it, saying it wasn't relevant anymore. The ruling ANC party doesn't sing it now, but they don't tell other parties what they can or can't sing.
It just shows how raw these issues still are, doesn't it? History, freedom of speech, reconciliation, it's all tangled up.
Absolutely. The legacy of apartheid casts a very long shadow over political speech today.
Which leads us straight to the big question. Is there widespread discrimination against white people in South Africa now? What do our sources say? The BBC acknowledged the effects of apartheid are definitely still felt.
Hugely. White South Africans, on average, still have much higher living standards than black South Africans. That's a fundamental reality.
And the stats back that up.
Oh, yes. The BBC cited figures showing white people holding something like 62% of top management jobs, even though they're only about, 7-8% of the economically active population.
Wow, that's a massive disparity.
It really illustrates the economic imbalance that persists.
And the government has policies to try and fix this, right?
Right.
Economic empowerment, employment equity.
Yes, those laws are designed to redress the historical disadvantage. They include targets for companies to hire and promote more non-white employees at all levels.
But that's caused some pushback.
It has. As the BBC notes, some people from minority groups, including some white South Africans, feel these laws make it harder for them to get jobs or move up. And there are also criticisms about, potential corruption in how these empowerment deals work sometimes.
So it's an attempt to level the playing field, but the implementation is complex and for some feels unfair.
Exactly. Good intentions meeting messy reality, perhaps.
Okay, so let's get into the specific takes on this genocide claim.
Yeah.
We already mentioned the BBC seemed skeptical, and that MSNBC piece by Reverend Nontambi Naomi Tutu, Desmond Tutu's daughter, was incredibly strong.
Very strong. She called Trump's claim an outrageous lie, flat out.
What was her reason?
She pointed directly at those disparities we just discussed. The land ownership, white people being about 7% of the population, but owning roughly 75% of the farmland, their dominance in top corporate jobs. Her point was, what kind of enviable genocide is this? She contrasted it very sharply with situations she considers actual genocide, like the plight of Palestinians. It really forces you to question the use of the word itself.
That comparison really hits hard, doesn't it? Makes you think about definitions. Okay, let's dive into the Reddit threads. What was the vibe on Favoritism bastards?
Interesting stuff there. One comment, supposedly from a white Afrikaner, was quite self-critical. Described a sort of culture of arrogance and racism within parts of the community, benefiting from apartheid but denying it, though they did say it wasn't everyone.
So not a unified victim narrative, even from within.
Seems not, according to that user. It suggests a more complex picture. Another commenter shared positive stories about individuals in trying to confront apartheid history in their church. Generally, though, the mood there seemed pretty skeptical of the whole white genocide idea.
Okay, what about red politics? How did Trump's action go down there?
Overwhelmingly negative, it seems. A lot of users saw it purely as a political stunt.
To appeal to who?
The interpretation was often that it was aimed at white nationalists in the U.S., using the refugee system for political points. A real sense that it distorted what being a refugee means.
And that it maybe prioritized this group unfairly.
Big time. Lots of comments about why this group, compared to others facing clear persecution, the idea that it wasn't based on a real assessment of genocide was strong.
Any mention of specific influences?
Yeah, some pointed fingers towards Elon Musk's comments, or suggested white supremacist thinking within Trump's circle might have played a role. The land issue also came up a lot.
Land expropriation without compensation.
Right. The argument being that even if the law isn't explicitly racial, it would hit white landowners hardest because of history. But others pointed out, importantly, that the law hadn't actually been put into practice yet.
Got it. Okay, rascal liberal. Similar themes.
Very similar skepticism. Lots of talk about Trump trolling or pushing a white supremacist agenda. The apparent fast-tracking of these refugees while others wait years or get denied was a major focus.
What about the song, Shoot the Boer?
Some mentioned it as definitely concerning, the rhetoric is harsh, but the overall take seemed to be, again, that nasty rhetoric doesn't automatically equal genocide. And the historical context apartheid, land inequality kept coming up as vital background.
So generally seeing it as political, not humanitarian.
That seems to be the consensus there, yeah. A misrepresentation of the reality in South Africa driven by politics or bias.
All right, finally, RAS conservatives. Did we see different perspectives there?
A bit more varied, yes. One user, claiming to be from South Africa, said racial discrimination there isn't really worse than many other places. They felt the empowerment laws for Black South Africans were sometimes misinterpreted as being anti-white.
Interesting. Did they mention reasons why people are leaving?
Yeah, they pointed to things affecting everyone, like load shedding, those planned power cuts, as a bigger driver for emigration across the board, not just racial persecution.
Provides a different angle.
Yeah.
What else came up?
Another user acknowledged that, yes, white farmers are attacked, but argued the statistics suggest it's broadly in line with South Africa's overall high crime rate, not necessarily targeted genocide.
So context is key even when discussing crime stats.
Crucial. And some conservatives there also acknowledged Musk's potential influence on the administration. And actually, a really interesting point came from a non-white conservative user.
Oh, yeah.
They basically asked, why the exception for white South Africans? Why are they getting this apparent special treatment compared to other groups seeking refuge? It raised that question of fairness and consistency in the refugee process from a different perspective.
That's a powerful question, regardless of political leaning. Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up. Wow, it's incredibly complex, isn't it?
Absolutely. You've got the deep scars of apartheid, the economic fallout that still exists, that incredibly divisive song, the whole land reform debate.
And just completely different ways people are interpreting discrimination versus, well, the ultimate crime of genocide.
And looking across our sources, while there's a whole spectrum of opinions, there's definitely significant skepticism from news outlets, commentators, online forums about calling the situation facing white South Africans a genocide.
The challenges are real. The inequalities persist, but the label genocide. Most sources seem to say it doesn't fit the internationally understood definition.
Right. And the political angle of Trump's decision is impossible to ignore looking at the reactions.
It really generated strong feelings on all sides.
So it leaves us, and you, the listener, with a really important question to chew on, I think. When you consider South Africa's history, all these viewpoints, what does it actually mean to be a refugee today? And how should we, as a global community, evaluate these claims of persecution, especially when they come from places with such complicated histories of injustice and ongoing inequality?
That's a heavy one, something to really think about. We definitely encourage you to dig deeper into apartheid's history and the nuances of South Africa today. There are no easy answers here.